The rain fell in thin, persistent sheets across the barren expanse of the McCrae homestead, turning the fresh-turned earth into mud. Ella McCrae stood alone beside the grave, her black dress already soaked through, watching as the last shovelful of dirt covered her husband's pine coffin. No flowers adorned the mound. There were none to be found in this harsh October. And even if there were, Samuel McCrae deserved none. The gravediggers had left an hour ago, eager to escape both the weather and the uncomfortable silence that hung over the burial. Even Reverend Whitlock had hurried through the service, stumbling over words meant to comfort a grieving widow. But Ella felt no grief, only a strange hollowness where emotion should have been, like an empty water barrel after a long drought. She pressed her hand against her ribs, feeling the tender spots where Samuel's fists had last landed 3 days before his horse threw him. The doctors said it was the drink that killed him, made him careless, made him take that treacherous canyon path in the dark. Ella knew better. It was his rage that killed him, the same black fury that had driven him for 15 years of marriage. The wind picked up, driving the rain sideways, but still she stood there, not out of respect or mourning, but because she didn't know what else to do. For so long, her days had been shaped by Samuel's moods, dodging his temper, managing his demands. Now there was only silence and the weight of an empty house behind her. "You should go inside, Mrs. McCrae." The voice made her start. Old Pete, Samuel's last remaining ranch hand, stood at a respectful distance, water streaming from his hat brim. "I'll be along," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. Pete shifted uncomfortably. "I'll be heading to town come morning. My sister's got work for me at her store." Ella nodded. She'd expected this. No one would stay now, not with Samuel gone and winter coming on. The ranch would fail without hands to work it. But she couldn't bring herself to care. Not yet. "There's 2 months' wages in the strongbox," she said. "Take what's owed you." Pete touched his hat and trudged away, leaving her alone again. The rain had soaked through to her skin now, cold and relentless. She thought of all the women in town who'd stood by their husbands' graves and wept genuine tears. She wondered what was wrong with her that she could feel only relief. Finally, when the daylight began to fade and her teeth chattered so hard she feared they might crack, Ella turned toward the house. It squatted against the darkening sky like a creature waiting to swallow her whole. 2 stories of weathered wood and broken dreams. Samuel had built it when they'd first married, promising her it would be filled with children and laughter. Instead, it had become her prison. Inside, the silence pressed against her ears. She built up the fire in the main room, her wet dress dripping on the floor she'd scrubbed just that morning out of habit. Her hands moved automatically, banking the coals, setting the kettle on, pulling the curtains against the night. Ordinary tasks for an ordinary evening. Except nothing would ever be ordinary again. She'd just sat down to a supper of cold biscuits and preserves when the knock came. 3 solid raps on the front door, deliberate and measured. Ella froze, her heart suddenly hammering. No one would call at this hour, not in this weather, not on the day of a burial. Her mind raced through possibilities. Samuel's brother from Denver, perhaps, come to claim the ranch. Or worse, one of the men from town who'd looked at her too long when Samuel wasn't watching, thinking a fresh widow might welcome company. The knock came again, patient but insistent. She rose slowly, wiping her palms on her skirt. Samuel's shotgun stood in the corner by the door, loaded as always. She considered it, then reached for the iron poker by the fireplace instead, less deadly but heavy enough to defend herself if needed. "Who's there?" she called through the door. "Name's Colt Harrow." The poker slipped in her grip. She knew that name, had heard it whispered in town for years like a curse. The horse thief who'd worked for Samuel before her time, caught red-handed and sent to territorial prison. Except Samuel had sometimes muttered that name in his sleep, usually after heavy drinking, and once, in a rare moment of honesty. Pete had mentioned that folks never did find those supposedly stolen horses. "What do you want?" Her voice came out steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. To talk, nothing more. Something in his tone, calm, measured, without threat, made her fingers move to the bolt. Foolish, perhaps. But if he meant harm, a barred door wouldn't stop a determined man. She'd learned that much from Samuel. She opened the door a few inches, keeping the poker hidden behind her skirts. Colt Harrow stood in the puddle of light from her doorway, rain streaming from his hat and long duster. He was taller than she remembered from those brief glimpses years ago, weather-beaten now, with premature silver threading through dark hair that needed cutting. His face was all angles and shadows, carved lean by hard years, but it was his eyes that held her, gray as the storm clouds, steady and strangely calm. "Mrs. McCrae," he said, touching his hat brim. "I heard about Samuel. Come to dance on his grave." The words came out sharper than she intended. A ghost of something, not quite a smile, passed over his features. "No, ma'am, I came to settle accounts." Her grip tightened on the poker. "If you're owed money—" "Not that kind of account." They stood there in the doorway, rain gusting between them, while she tried to read his intentions. Everything about him spoke of contained power. The way he held himself, the steadiness of his gaze, the careful placement of his hands where she could see them. This wasn't the wild young cowboy who'd been dragged off to prison 5 years ago. This was something altogether more dangerous. "I didn't come to hurt you," he said, as if reading her thoughts, "or to take anything. I just need to say my piece. After that, I'll trouble you no more." Perhaps it was exhaustion, or the strange unreality of the day, or simply that she was tired of being afraid in her own home. Whatever the reason. Ella stepped back and opened the door wider. "You can say your piece by the fire. No need to stand in the rain like a scarecrow." He hesitated, clearly not expecting the invitation, then stepped inside with a quiet, "much obliged." She kept her distance as he shrugged off his wet duster and hung it on the peg by the door. Underneath, his clothes were worn but clean, dark shirt, canvas pants, boots that had seen better decades. A gun rode low on his hip, the holster tied down in the way of men who lived by their speed. "Coffee?" she offered, needing something to do with her hands. "If it's no trouble." She busied herself with cups and the pot, aware of him settling into the chair across from Samuel's empty place at the table. When she finally sat down, the poker within easy reach, she forced herself to meet his eyes. "Say what you came to say, Mr. Harrow." He wrapped his hands around the hot cup but didn't drink. "Your husband destroyed my life, took my freedom, my reputation, my future, all for 30 head of horses that never existed outside his imagination and greed." The words should have sparked defense, denial. Instead, Ella felt only a weary recognition. "I know," she said quietly. His eyes sharpened. "You know, I suspected Samuel was capable of many things." She touched her ribs unconsciously, then caught herself. "But suspicion isn't proof." "No," he agreed. "But I've got proof now. Took me 5 years, but I tracked down the real buyer of those horses, Bill Hutchins, up in Wyoming. Still had the bill of sale, Samuel's signature, not mine, the horses he claimed I stole. He'd already sold." Ella stared into her coffee, watching the liquid swirl. "Why tell me this? Samuel's beyond any earthly justice now." "Because someone should know the truth. Because I spent 5 years in that hellhole. Nearly died twice. Lost everything I'd built. Because I came back to find my girl married to another man and my family scattered to the winds." His voice never rose, but she could hear the banked fire beneath the calm. Someone should know what kind of man Samuel McCrae really was. "I knew," she whispered. Then, louder, "I knew exactly what kind of man he was." Their eyes met across the table, and in that moment, she saw his controlled facade crack slightly. He'd expected denial, perhaps, or tears, or pleas for forgiveness on her husband's behalf. He hadn't expected this quiet acknowledgement of shared truth. The wind howled around the house, rattling the windows. The fire popped and settled. Outside, She could hear the rain drumming on Samuel's fresh grave, washing away the loose earth. Soon there would be nothing but a muddy depression to mark where he lay. "I'm sorry," she said finally, "for what he did to you, for what he was." Colt Harrow studied her for a long moment, and she wondered what he saw. A woman worn down by years of marriage to a cruel man? A survivor? Or just another person trying to make sense of the senseless? "I didn't come for apologies," he said. "I came for justice. But now—" He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Seems the Almighty had his own ideas about that. He moved toward his duster, and Ella found herself on her feet as well. "Where will you go?" He paused with his hand on the wet coat. "Haven't decided. Away from here." "In this storm? The roads will be washed out by now. I've ridden through worse." "The barn," she heard herself saying. "There's a tack room with a stove. It's dry, at least." He turned to look at her, and she saw surprise flicker across his features. "You'd offer shelter to a man with every reason to hate your husband?" "My husband is dead," she said simply. "And you've done nothing to harm me. I see no reason to send any man out into this weather." He considered this, then nodded slowly. "Just for tonight," as he pulled on his duster and prepared to leave. Ella felt an unexpected pang. For the first time since Pete had announced his departure, she truly understood what the coming days would bring. Tomorrow, she would wake to an empty house, with winter closing in and no one to help work the ranch. Tomorrow, she would have to face the reality of a woman alone in a world that had no place for such creatures. But tonight, at least, she wouldn't be entirely alone on this desolate piece of earth. There would be another living soul in the barn, someone who understood the weight of Samuel's cruelty, even if from a different angle. "Mr. Harrow," she called as he reached the door. He turned back, waiting. "Thank you for telling me the truth, for not coming here with violence in your heart." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, perhaps, or simply an acknowledgement of pain shared and recognized. "Get some rest, Mrs. McCrae," he said quietly. "Tomorrow will come soon enough." Then he was gone, swallowed by the storm, leaving Ella alone with the dying fire and the echo of rain on the roof. She sank back into her chair, suddenly exhausted beyond measure, but for the first time in years, the exhaustion didn't carry the weight of dread for what morning might bring. She thought of Colt Harrow, settling into the cold tack room, and wondered what had really brought him here on this of all nights. Justice, he'd said. But she'd seen something else in his eyes when he'd looked at her, a recognition, perhaps. One survivor to another. The wind shifted, driving rain against the windows like thrown pebbles. Somewhere, out in the darkness, Samuel lay in his grave, beyond the reach of storm or judgment, and in the barn. A man he'd wronged was taking shelter from the same storm that had masked the sound of her tears all afternoon. Ella rose and began clearing away the cups, her movements automatic. Tomorrow would indeed come soon enough, bringing with it all the challenges of her new existence. But tonight, she thought as she climbed the stairs to her empty bed, tonight she would sleep without flinching at every creak of the house, without tensing for the sound of drunken footsteps on the porch. It wasn't peace, exactly, but it was a beginning. Dawn came late, filtered through heavy clouds that promised more rain. Ella woke to silence, no stomping boots, no harsh demands for breakfast. She lay still for a moment, adjusting to this strange new reality, before remembering her overnight guest in the barn. She dressed quickly and descended to the kitchen, building up the fire and setting coffee to brew. Through the window, she could see smoke rising from the barn's tin chimney. At least he'd kept warm through the night. She was frying bacon and biscuits when the knock came, softer this time, almost hesitant. "Come in," she called, not turning from the stove. Colt Harrow entered quietly, hat in hand. In daylight, she could see him more clearly. Prison had left its mark in the deep lines around his eyes, the way he held himself ready for trouble, the careful distance he kept even in the small kitchen. "Morning, Mrs. McCrae. I'll be on my way after I tend to my horse." "Breakfast first," she said, setting a plate before him. No sense riding out hungry? He hesitated, then sat. They ate in silence at first. The only sounds the clink of forks and the rain beginning again outside. 5 years, she finally said. That's a long time to pay for another man's crime. His hand stilled on his coffee cup. Yes, ma'am, it is. Will you tell me about it? What really happened? Colt looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing her interest. Are you sure you want to know? Samuel's beyond hurting, and I need to understand the kind of man I married, the full measure of him. He pushed his plate away, settling back in his chair. I was 23, working as Samuel's foreman, good with horses, better with the accounts. He didn't like that, me being able to read his numbers, knowing what came in and what went out. Ella nodded. Samuel had always kept the books locked away, flying into rages if she so much as glanced at them. That spring, he made a deal to sell 30 head to the army post up north. Good horses, would have brought top dollar, but there was another buyer, Bill Hutchins, offering more. Samuel wanted both payoffs. So he sold them to Hutchins instead? And told the army I'd stolen them. Had false witnesses, 2 drifters he'd paid off. Said they saw me driving the herd east in the night. His jaw tightened. My word against 3 men's. The territorial judge didn't hesitate. But you had friends, surely. People who knew your character? A bitter smile touched his lips. Samuel made sure to paint me as a malcontent first, spread stories about me challenging his authority, questioning his methods. By the time the accusation came, folks were primed to believe it. Ella felt sick. It was so like Samuel. The careful planning, the calculated cruelty. The prison, was it? Territorial prison in Laramie. Stone walls, iron bars, and guards who enjoyed their work too much. He absently rubbed his left shoulder. First year, I nearly died from pneumonia. Second year, got stabbed in a fight I didn't start. After that, I learned to be someone else. Someone harder. But you survived, if you can call it that. He met her eyes. The man who went into that prison isn't the one who came out. That boy believed in justice, in truth, winning out. This man knows better. Yet you didn't come here for revenge. Thought about it. All those years, I planned what I'd do to Samuel McCrae, how I'd make him pay. He shook his head. But when I finally got out, tracked down that bill of sale, proved my innocence, the anger just felt tired. I wanted him to know I knew. Wanted to see his face when he realized his scheme had unraveled. Instead, he died in a drunken accident 3 days ago. The Lord's justice, maybe, or just dumb luck. He stood, reaching for his hat. Either way, it's done. Wait, Ella rose too, not sure what she wanted to say. I heard you mention a girl. Someone you were planning to marry? His face closed off. Mary Patterson. Married Tom Brewster 2 years into my sentence. Can't blame her. A woman needs security, and I was looking at 20 years. I'm sorry. Don't be. She made the practical choice. He moved toward the door, then paused. What will you do now? This ranch is too much for one person. Ella looked around the kitchen, at the worn floors she'd scrubbed countless times, the walls that had witnessed too much anger. I don't know. Samuel's brother will likely come claiming rights to the land. The hands have all left or are leaving. I suppose I'll have to sell. Go back east, maybe. You have people there? No, but a widow might find work in a city. Seamstress, perhaps, or shop clerk. He studied her with those steady gray eyes. That what you want? Want? When had anyone last asked what she wanted? I want to not be afraid anymore, she said quietly. Beyond that, I haven't dared dream. Something flickered across his face. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. Fear's a hard habit to break, even when the source is gone. They stood there in the doorway. 2 people who'd been shaped by the same cruel man. Different scars, but similar wounds. The rain had softened to a drizzle, mist rising from the ground like ghosts. That fence along the north pasture, Colt said suddenly. It's near to falling. Won't last the winter storms. Ella blinked at the change of subject. I know. Samuel kept saying he'd fix it, but I could shore it up. Wouldn't take but a day or two. I can't pay you, not what it's worth. Didn't ask for pay. He settled his hat on his head. Just seems a shame to let good land go to ruin for want of some fence posts. Before she could respond, he was striding toward the barn, leaving her standing in the doorway with words unsaid. She watched him go, this strange man who'd appeared from the storm carrying justice he'd never receive and offering help she hadn't requested. The morning passed in a blur of necessary tasks. She fed the chickens, collected eggs, checked on the milk cow. Through it all, she could hear the ring of hammer on nail from the north pasture. When she carried water out to him at midday, she found he'd already reset 3 posts and restrung wire between them. You don't have to do this, she said, offering the water bucket. He drank deeply, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Manual labor clears the head. Prison taught me that much. She watched him work for a moment, the efficient movements, the careful attention to each post. You were a good foreman, weren't you? Before everything happened. I tried to be. Loved the work. Breaking horses, managing the herds, planning improvements. He gestured at the pasture. This whole section should be refenced. Really. And that creek needs its banks shored up before spring flooding. You sound like you're planning to stay. He stopped mid-swing, hammer suspended. No, ma'am, just observing what needs doing. But he worked until dusk, and when she called him in for supper, he came. They ate beef stew and cornbread while the wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. The tack room would be cold tonight, but when she suggested he sleep by the main fire instead, he shook his head. Wouldn't be proper, Mrs. McCrae. People talk. People will talk regardless. They always do. Maybe so, but no need to give them extra ammunition. After he left, Ella sat by the dying fire, thinking about propriety and reputation. Tomorrow, she'd have to go to town for supplies, face the stares and whispers, the false sympathy and real judgment, the new widow, dry-eyed at her husband's funeral, harboring a convicted horse thief on her property. Let them talk, she thought with sudden fierceness. They'd whispered about her bruises for years and done nothing. Their opinions held no weight anymore. That night, she heard wolves howling in the distant hills. Lonely, wild sounds that seemed to echo the emptiness inside her. But there was light in the barn window. Another human presence in the darkness. It shouldn't have mattered, but somehow, it did. She fell asleep thinking about fence posts and flooded creeks, about plans for land she might not get to keep, about a man who'd lost 5 years but still saw what needed fixing, about the strange comfort of eating supper with someone who didn't make her flinch when he reached for the salt. When morning came, she'd make breakfast for 2 again, and maybe, just maybe, she'd ask about those improvements he'd mentioned. After all, the fence wasn't the only thing on this ranch that needed shoring up, and winter was coming fast. The wagon wheels creaked as Ella guided the team down Main Street, her black morning dress drawing eyes like a magnet draws iron filings. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, but she could feel the weight of stares from doorways and windows. 3 days since the burial, and here she was, conducting business as if nothing had changed. Whoa, she called softly, drawing up outside Morrison's general store. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the brake. This was the first real test of her new status, facing the town alone. Inside, the usual morning crowd fell silent. Mrs. Morrison, behind the counter, offered a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mrs. McCrae, our condolences on your loss. Thank you, Ella replied, pulling out her list. I need supplies. She moved through the store methodically, aware of whispers trailing in her wake. At the fabric counter, she overheard Agnes Brewster, Tom's wife, who'd married Colt's former girl, speaking in tones meant to carry. Shocking, really. Barely cold in the ground, and she's already entertaining men at the homestead. That convict, no less. Ella's hand tightened on a bolt of calico, but she didn't turn. Let them talk. She'd learned long ago that defending herself only fed the gossip mill. 20 pounds of flour, she told Mr. Morrison, who was eyeing her with uncomfortable intensity. 10 of sugar, coffee, salt pork. That's a lot for one person, he interrupted. Planning to stay on at the ranch? That's my business, Mr. Morrison. He flushed but tallied her goods. As he worked, Martha Whitlock, the Reverend's wife, approached with false sympathy painted across her face. Dear Ella, how are you managing? All alone out there? It must be so difficult. I'm managing fine, thank you. Still, a woman alone. It's not safe, not proper. Martha leaned closer, her voice dropping. And people are saying you've got that Harrow fellow hanging about. Surely you know what kind of man he is. I know exactly what kind of man he is, Ella said evenly, just as I knew what kind of man my husband was. Martha's face went rigid. Samuel was a pillar of this community. Samuel was a liar and a thief who sent an innocent man to prison. The words came out louder than intended, cutting through the store's buzz. And if folks had paid half as much attention to his cruelties as they do to my supposed improprieties, maybe, she bit off the words, aware that the entire store was now staring openly. Martha backed away as if Ella had struck her. Well, the Reverend's wife huffed. I was only trying to help. But if you prefer the company of criminals, I prefer the company of honest men, Mrs. Whitlock. If that makes me scandalous, so be it. She turned back to Morrison, who was packaging her goods with newfound haste. The silence in the store felt thick enough to cut. At the door, she paused, looking back at the assembled crowd. Colt Harrow is helping repair my fences. Nothing more. Though I'd think folks would be more interested in justice for a man wrongly imprisoned than in spreading gossip about a widow trying to keep her ranch from falling apart. Outside, she loaded her supplies with hands that shook, not from fear now, but from a kind of exhilaration. She'd spoken the truth in public, had refused to bow to their expectations. It felt like shedding a too tight skin. On the ride home, she noticed storm clouds building over the mountains. The wind had shifted, carrying the scent of snow. Winter was coming early this year, and she still had so much to prepare. She found Colt working on the barn roof, replacing shingles torn loose by recent storms. He climbed down when he saw her, moving to help unload the wagon. Tough morning, he asked, likely reading something in her face. Educational. She replied, I learned that I'm apparently a scandal to the community. His mouth quirked slightly. On account of me? On account of not weeping dramatically over my husband's grave while entertaining a dangerous criminal. She hefted a sack of flour. Mrs. Whitlock was particularly concerned about my moral welfare. Martha Whitlock wouldn't recognize morality if it bit her on her bustle. He took the flour from her, their fingers brushing briefly. Want me to clear out? Last thing you need is more trouble. No. The word came quickly, firmly. I won't be driven by gossips and hypocrites. You're helping keep this place standing, and I'm grateful for it. They worked in companionable silence, storing the supplies. As they finished, the first fat snowflakes began to fall. Colt looked up at the sky with a frown. This is going to be a bad one. Feel it in my bones. Your bones are reliable weather prophets? Prison gift. Old injuries complain when storms are coming. He flexed his left shoulder unconsciously. We should bring the stock closer to the barn. Get extra wood split. We. Such a small word to carry such weight. I'll help, she said. They spent the afternoon preparing for the storm, driving the cattle into the near pasture, securing loose boards, hauling water. The snow fell harder, transforming the landscape into something alien and beautiful. As they worked side by side, Ella felt something she hadn't experienced in years, partnership, not orders barked and obeyed, but two people laboring toward a common goal. By evening, the storm had become a blizzard. Wind howled around the house like a living thing, and snow piled against the windows. They'd eaten a simple supper, and now Colt stood at the door, preparing to fight his way to the barn. This is foolish, Ella said, watching him wrap a scarf around his face. You'll freeze before you get halfway there. I'll be fine. Done it before. Not from my house. You haven't. She made a decision. Propriety be damned. There's a cot in the storage room off the kitchen. It's warm and dry, and you won't die trying to prove you're respectable. He hesitated, clearly torn between practicality and propriety. A particularly vicious gust of wind decided him. Just for tonight, he said, till the storm passes. She fetched blankets while he brought in more wood. Soon he was settled in the small room, and she was acutely aware of his presence just beyond her kitchen wall. Not threatening, as Samuel's presence had always been, but simply there, another heartbeat in the house. Unable to sleep, she sat by the fire, mending one of her worn dresses. The storm raged outside, but inside was warmth and quiet. Through the thin wall, she could hear Colt shifting on the narrow cot, probably as wakeful as she. "Can't sleep either," she called softly. "Not used to walls this close," came the reply. "Prison does that. Makes you crave open spaces." She set down her sewing and moved closer to the doorway. "Tell me about the horses, the ones you were accused of stealing." "Why?" "Because I spent 15 years with a man who lied as easily as breathing. I want to hear truth for a change." There was a long pause. Then, "They were beauties. 3 mares, 1 bay, 2 chestnuts. Best bloodlines I'd ever worked with. I'd helped birth 2 of them. Trained all 3 myself." His voice carried a wistfulness that made her chest tight. "You loved them." "Love's too simple a word. They were possibility. Proof that I could build something worthwhile. When Samuel accused me of stealing them, it wasn't just my freedom he took. It was my future." Ella closed her eyes, seeing another young person's dreams crushed by Samuel McCrae. Her dreams had been simpler. A home filled with love, children's laughter, a husband who touched her with kindness, all of it ground to dust under his boots. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For all of it. Don't apologize for his sins. You've got enough of your own burden to carry." She thought of the bruises hidden beneath her dress, the careful way she still moved around men, the flinch she couldn't quite suppress when voices were raised. "We all carry what we must. That why you didn't cry at his grave? Too much weight already." The question should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like recognition. "I used up all my tears years ago. What was left wasn't grief, it was just emptiness. I know that feeling. When they finally let me out, I stood outside those gates for an hour, not knowing where to go. Everything I'd worked for was gone. Everyone I'd cared about had moved on. Just empty horizon in every direction. But you came here. Had to. Couldn't move forward until I'd faced it. Him." A bitter laugh. "Lot of good that did. Maybe it did more good than you know." The words came without thought, straight from someplace deep. "You showed me something today, in town. I mean, that speaking truth matters, even when no one wants to hear it." "You stood up to them?" Told Martha Whitlock exactly what kind of man Samuel was. "In front of half the town." A smile tugged at her lips. "You should have seen her face." His chuckle was warm in the darkness. "Wish I had. That woman's got a poker up her spine where her backbone should be." They talked on as the storm raged. About horses and dreams, about the ranch's needs, about nothing and everything. When she finally climbed the stairs to bed, the house didn't feel empty anymore. There was another soul under her roof, someone who understood the weight of Samuel's legacy. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The town would talk more than ever. Samuel's brother would eventually come calling. Winter would test every repair they'd made, but tonight, with snow piling deep and wind singing wild songs, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 15 years of marriage. Safe. Not just from physical harm, but safe to speak, to exist without fear of judgment or reprisal. It was, she realized as sleep finally claimed her, what home was supposed to feel like all along. The sheriff arrived on a cold Thursday morning, his breath misting in the air as he dismounted. Ella saw him through the kitchen window and felt her stomach clench. Sheriff Wade Hutchinson had always been Samuel's man, drinking whiskey with him on Saturday nights, turning a blind eye to bruises on Sunday mornings. "Mrs. McCrae," he called, touching his hat as she opened the door. "Need a word with you." "Sheriff." She kept her voice steady, though her hands gripped her apron. "Coffee? This ain't a social call." His eyes scanned the yard, landing on Colt, who was splitting wood by the barn. "That who I think it is? Colt Harrow is helping with repairs. Colt Harrow is a convicted criminal who shouldn't be within 10 miles of a respectable widow." Hutchinson's hand rested on his gun belt. "I'm here to suggest he move along." Suggest? Ella felt her spine straighten. On what authority? "On the authority of keeping peace in this county. Folks are talking. Ma'am, don't like what they're saying." Colt had stopped splitting wood and was walking toward them, unhurried but alert. The sheriff's hand tightened on his gun. "Sheriff," Colt said, stopping at a careful distance. "Problem? You're the problem. Harrow, thought you'd learned your lesson about showing your face around here. Learned plenty of lessons, including that innocent men can go to prison when lawmen don't do their jobs." Hutchinson's face darkened. "Watch your mouth, boy. Or what? You'll fabricate charges against me again?" Colt's voice remained level, but Ella could see the tension in his shoulders. "I've got papers from territorial court clearing my name. Judge Morrison himself signed them. Want to see? Papers don't change what folks remember." "No," Ella interjected, surprising them both. "What folks remember is Samuel McCrae was a respected rancher. They don't remember the horses that went missing from the Army contract. They don't remember you, Sheriff, helping cover up the truth." Hutchinson turned on her, eyes narrowed. "Careful. Mrs. McCrae. Grief can make people say unfortunate things. Truth isn't unfortunate. Sheriff, it's necessary." She moved to stand beside Colt. "Mr. Harrow is employed here as a ranch hand. If you have legal cause to remove him, state it. Otherwise, I'll ask you to leave my property." The sheriff's jaw worked like he was chewing tobacco. "You're making a mistake, woman. This town won't stand for—" "This town stood by while my husband beat me for 15 years, Ella said quietly. "I don't much care what it will or won't stand for now." The silence stretched taut as fence wire. Finally, Hutchinson spat to the side. "Don't come crying to me when this goes bad, and it will go bad." He mounted his horse, looking down at them. "The McCrae name meant something in this county. You're spitting on your husband's memory. I'm trying to salvage something worthwhile from it." Ella replied. After he rode off, she found herself trembling. Colt touched her elbow gently. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." She looked up at him. "I've been silent too long. Complicit too long." That evening, as they ate supper, she noticed Colt favoring his left side. "You're hurt." "Old injury. Cold makes it ache." He shifted uncomfortably. Prison guard liked using axe handles on ribs. Without thinking, she rose and moved behind his chair. "May I?" He nodded slowly. She placed her hands on his shoulder, feeling the knots of tension and old pain. As she worked, he gradually relaxed, his breathing deepening. "Sarah," he said suddenly. Her hands stilled. "What?" "My sister. She had gentle hands like that. Used to rub my shoulders after long days breaking horses." His voice was distant. "Haven't seen her since the trial. She married, moved to California. Wrote me once to say she was sorry, but her husband didn't want a convicted thief's brother around." Ella resumed her ministrations, her heart aching for losses beyond counting. "Families can disappoint us. You have family. Parents died when I was 17. Typhoid. I married Samuel a year later. He seemed stable, established." A bitter laugh escaped. "I was so young, so eager to belong somewhere again. We all make choices based on what we know at the time." She worked in silence for a moment, then asked, "Do you regret coming back here? Ask me when winter's over." Her hands found a particularly tight knot, and he inhaled sharply. Without thinking, she leaned closer, her breath warm against his neck. "Sorry, don't be." His voice had gone rough. "Ella." The use of her given name sent something electric through the air between them. She should step back, return to proper distance. Instead, she let her hands slide down to rest on his shoulders, feeling the warmth of him through his shirt. He turned in the chair, looking up at her. His gray eyes held storms and questions. Slowly, giving her time to retreat, he reached up and touched her face. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone with impossible gentleness. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. "I don't want you to stop." He stood, still moving slowly, and suddenly they were so close she could feel his breath. One hand cupped her face while the other settled at her waist. Not grabbing, not demanding, just resting there like a question. "I'm no good for you," he said. "Broken ex-convict with nothing to offer but damaged goods and bad reputation. And I'm a widow who couldn't mourn her husband, finding solace with the man he wronged." Her hand covered his. "Maybe we're exactly what each other needs." He kissed her then, soft and careful, as if she might shatter. She'd been kissed before, Samuel's brutal claiming of her mouth. But this was different. This was conversation and question. Give and take. When he would have pulled back, she followed, her arms winding around his neck. The kiss deepened. 15 years of loneliness and 5 years of prison walls crumbling between them. His hands remained gentle, even as passion built, always aware, always careful. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Ella, A sound outside made them freeze. Hoofbeats. Approaching fast. They sprang apart just as pounding rattled the door. "Open up! Sheriff's business!" But it wasn't Hutchinson's voice. Colt's hand went to his gun as Ella moved to the window. "It's Deputy Morrison, and he's alone." She opened the door to find the young deputy looking terrified. "Mrs. McCrae, you need to come quick. There's been trouble in town." "The sheriff, he's gathering men, talking about riding out here, says Harrow threatened him, that you're being held against your will." "That's ridiculous," Ella said. "I know that. Ma'am, that's why I rode ahead. Thought you should have warning." The boy, he couldn't be more than 20, looked at Colt. "They're liquored up and talking lynch law. You need to go." "I'm not running," Colt said flatly. "Done that. Won't do it again." "Then you'll die, and maybe Mrs. McCrae with you." Morrison's voice cracked. "Please, my PA says you were innocent, that what happened 5 years ago was wrong. Don't let them compound it with more bloodshed." Ella felt the room spin slightly. This was how it worked. The town's justice, swift and brutal when its prejudices were challenged. "How long do we have?" "Hour, maybe 2. They were still gathering when I slipped away." She turned to Colt. "Saddle the horses, we're leaving. Ella, both of us, now." She was already moving, pulling her cash box from its hiding place. "Deputy, can you delay them?" "I'll try. Ma'am, say my horse threw a shoe or something." He looked relieved. "There's an old line shack up Pewter Canyon. Nobody uses it anymore. You could hole up there till things calm down." After he left, they worked in focused silence, packing food, blankets, ammunition. Ella changed into Samuel's old riding clothes, tucking her hair under a hat. As they led the horses out, she took one last look at the house. "We'll come back," Colt said quietly, "when the law's real instead of whiskey courage." She nodded, not trusting her voice. Then they mounted and rode into the darkness, leaving behind the only home she'd known for 15 years. But as they climbed toward the canyon, Colt riding steady beside her, she realized she was taking with her something more valuable than any house. The possibility of a life lived without fear. The sound of their horses' hooves echoed off the canyon walls, a rhythm like heartbeats in the night. Behind them, somewhere in the distance, torches would be gathering. But ahead lay the unknown, dangerous, uncertain, but theirs to face together. For the first time since she'd said, "I do" to Samuel McCrae, Ella felt truly alive. Whatever came next, she would meet it as herself, not a possession or a victim, but a woman who'd finally found her voice and a man who heard it clearly. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant, as they climbed higher into the sheltering dark. The line shack perched on a narrow ledge like a forgotten thought, its weathered boards gray in the dawn light. They'd ridden through the night, pushing the horses hard up treacherous paths that would discourage pursuit. Now, as Colt helped her dismount, Ella felt the exhaustion in her bones. "Not much, but it'll do," he said, shouldering open the warped door. Inside was sparse, a rusted stove, 2 narrow bunks with moldering mattresses, a table scarred by years of use. But the roof was solid and the walls would block the wind. They worked without speaking to settle the horses in the lean-to and haul their supplies inside. "You should rest," Colt said as she swayed on her feet. "I'll keep watch. We'll take turns." She sank onto one of the bunks, not bothering to remove Samuel's oversized coat. "Wake me in 2 hours." But when she woke, pale afternoon light slanted through the single window. Colt sat at the table, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. He'd built a small fire in the stove, and the shack held blessed warmth. "You let me sleep. You needed it." He didn't look up from his work. No sign of pursuit. Trails too rough for a mob, especially hungover. She sat up, working out the kinks from sleeping in men's clothes on a hard surface. Strange how quickly comfort became relative. What now? Now we wait. Let tempers cool. Deputy Morrison seems like a good kid. He'll talk sense when he can. And if they don't cool, if Hutchinson keeps stirring the pot, he set down the rifle, finally meeting her eyes. Then we move on. California, maybe Oregon, somewhere the McCrae name means nothing. Just like that? Leave everything behind? What's keeping you here, Ella? A house full of bad memories? Land you never wanted? She thought of the ranch. Already it seemed like something from another life. "It's all I have." "No." He leaned forward, intense. "It's all you had. What you have now is choice." Choice. Such a foreign concept. For so long her life had been dictated by Samuel's moods, society's expectations, the narrow boundaries of what a wife could be. Now those boundaries had shattered, leaving her dizzy with possibility. "I need air," she said, rising abruptly. Outside, the view stole her breath. The canyon dropped away in rust-colored layers, and beyond that the valley spread like a rumpled blanket. Somewhere down there, her house sat empty. Were they ransacking it even now? Breaking windows, stealing what little she'd left behind? Let them, she thought with sudden fierceness. Things could be replaced. Freedom couldn't. Colt joined her, standing close but not touching. Second thoughts. "No, just adjusting." She glanced at him. "This must seem small to you. After 5 years in prison, running from a mob, hiding in the mountains. Prison was about surviving. This is about living. There's a difference." "Is there? Feels like we're still in a cage, just with wider bars." He turned to face her fully. "Ella, what happened last night?" "Don't!" She couldn't bear if he apologized. Took it back. "Please don't say it was a mistake." "I was going to say it was inevitable." His hand found hers. "From the moment I knocked on your door, maybe before, like something drawing us together. Shared damage, shared strength." He squeezed gently. "Do you know how rare it is? To survive what we survived and still be capable of gentleness?" She thought of his careful hands on the horses, the way he'd kissed her like she was precious. "Samuel tried to beat it out of me, but he failed. That's what matters." They stood in comfortable silence, watching shadows shift across the canyon. Then practical needs asserted themselves. Water to haul, food to prepare, plans to make. They worked together with the easy coordination of long partnership, though they'd known each other mere days. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted. They'd dragged one mattress near the stove, piling it with all their blankets. Now they faced the question neither had voiced. "I can sleep on the floor," Colt offered. "You could." She met his eyes steadily. "Or we could share warmth and comfort, like practical people who might not survive the night otherwise." His mouth quirked. "Practical. Very." They prepared for bed with careful politeness, her turning away while he stripped to his union suit, him stepping outside while she changed into her nightdress. But when they lay down together, All pretense fell away. She curled into his warmth, her head on his shoulder, and felt something inside her finally unclench. His arm came around her, holding her close but not captive. "Tell me about California," she said into the darkness. "Your sister. Last letter said she had a little farm near Sacramento. Chickens, vegetables, 2 kids now." His voice rumbled through his chest. "Her husband's a banker. Probably wouldn't welcome a brother-in-law with my history. We don't need welcome, just a place to start fresh." "We?" The word held wonder. "You'd really come with me?" "Where else would I go?" She traced patterns on his chest. "Besides, someone needs to keep you from making noble sacrifices." He chuckled. "That what I've been doing? Fixing my fences, standing up to the sheriff, kissing me like—" She stopped, heat flooding her face. "Like what?" His voice had gone deep. "Like I matter. Like I'm worth something beyond cooking and cleaning and enduring." He shifted, turning to face her in the dim light. "Ella, you're worth everything. Your courage, your kindness after all you've been through. You humble me." She kissed him then, pouring into it all the words she couldn't say. This time there was no interruption, no angry mob to flee, just the two of them in a borrowed shelter, finding in each other what the world had tried to steal. His hands were reverent as they explored, always gentle, always asking permission. When she gasped his name, he stilled. "We don't have to, I want to." She'd never said those words before, never felt them. "I want you." What followed was nothing like her wedding night or the years after. No pain, no endurance, no closing her eyes and waiting for it to end. Instead, there was discovery and delight, passion tempered with tenderness. He touched her like she was a gift, and for the first time in her life, she felt like one. After, they lay entwined, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. The fire had died to embers, but she felt warm throughout. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "Only that it took so long to find you." His arms tightened around her. "We found each other. That's what matters." Outside, wind sang through the canyon, and somewhere wolves howled at the moon. But inside their small shelter, there was warmth and safety and the beginning of something neither had dared hope for. "What if they come tomorrow?" she asked. "What if we have to run again?" "Then we run together." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I spent 5 years dreaming of freedom. Never imagined it would look like this." "Like what?" "Like you." She smiled against his chest. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, pursuit or peace, staying or fleeing, building a new life from ashes of the old. But tonight, she had this. Strong arms around her, gentle hands that had learned her secrets, a heart that beat steady and true beneath her palm. It was more than enough. It was everything. Sleep took her gently, and for the first time since she could remember, she wasn't afraid of what morning might bring. Whatever came, they would face it as they'd faced everything else, together, honest, unafraid to speak truth in a world that preferred comfortable lies. The mountains kept their counsel, ancient and patient, as two damaged souls found healing in each other's arms. And somewhere in the valley below, an empty house stood testament to a life abandoned and a future claimed. 3 days passed in the mountain shelter before Deputy Morrison found them. They heard his horse long before he appeared, giving them time to prepare, Colt with his rifle ready, Ella with Samuel's pistol tucked in her waistband. "Mrs. McCrae, Mr. Harrow?" Morrison called from a safe distance. "I'm alone. Come with news." Colt stepped out first, weapon lowered but ready. "Speak your piece, deputy." The young man dismounted slowly, hands visible. "The sheriff's backed down. My father and Judge Whelan had words with him about mob law. Made it clear that wouldn't stand." He pulled papers from his saddlebag. "There's more. This came by stage yesterday." Ella emerged to take the document, official-looking, with multiple seals. As she read, her hands began to tremble. "It's from the territorial court, about Samuel's will." "What about it?" Colt moved closer, reading over her shoulder. His brother Marcus contested it, saying a widow who abandoned her home had no claim. She looked up at Morrison. But the court ruled in my favor. The ranch is mine, free and clear. Morrison nodded. Judge Whelan made sure of it. Said he'd had enough of the McCrae family thinking they owned the law. He shifted uncomfortably. There's something else. We found papers in the sheriff's office. Seems Hutchinson was getting paid by your late husband. Regular payments for services rendered. That explains his enthusiasm for running us off, Colt said dryly. He's resigned. Left town this morning. Morrison looked at Ella earnestly. You can come home, ma'am. Both of you. Won't say everyone's happy about it, but the law's on your side now. Home. The word sat strangely in Ella's chest. That house had never been home, just a place of endurance. She looked at Colt, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. We need to talk, she told Morrison. Can you wait? The deputy nodded, settling himself on a boulder with the patience of youth. Ella drew Colt back into the shack. We don't have to go back, he said immediately. California's still there. A fresh start. I know. She touched his face, feeling the roughness of 3 days' beard. But maybe running isn't the answer. Maybe standing our ground is... You want to go back after everything? I want to make something new from the ashes of the old. She took his hands. That ranch could be good land with proper care. And the town, it's changing. Slowly, but changing. They'll never accept us. You know that. I don't need their acceptance. I need purpose, partnership. She squeezed his hands. I need you. The question is, can you stay? Knowing what people will say, how they'll look at you. He was quiet for a long moment, and she could see the war in him, the desire to protect her from judgment against the weariness of always running. Finally, he pulled her close. I go where you go, he said simply. If you want to try, we try. They rode back to the ranch that afternoon, Morrison accompanying them like an honor guard. The house sat untouched, though dust had gathered and the fire had long gone cold, while Colt tended the horses. Ella walked through the rooms, seeing them with new eyes. Here, the kitchen table where she'd cowered through so many angry meals. There, the stairs she'd crept up, trying not to wake Samuel in his drunken stupors, but also the windows that could frame sunrise instead of fear, the floors that could know laughter instead of tears, the walls that could shelter love instead of violence. We'll need help, Colt said from the doorway. Can't run a ranch with just 2 people? I know someone, Morrison offered, still lingering. Tom Garrett, good man, fair worker. His family's been struggling since the mine closed. And so it began. Over the following days, the ranch transformed. Tom Garrett arrived with his teenage sons, eager for honest work. They mucked stalls and mended fences while Ella attacked the house with possessed energy, scrubbing away years of misery, opening windows that had been nailed shut, burning Samuel's clothes in a cleansing bonfire. The first time she and Colt went to town together, the stares nearly drove her back. But she held her head high, his solid presence beside her giving her strength. At Morrison's store, the old man himself waited on them. Heard you're hiring, he said gruffly. Tom Garrett's a good choice. Thank you, Ella replied, meeting his eyes steadily. Also heard that you found some interesting papers about my son's predecessor. The past is past. Mr. Morrison. We're looking forward. The old man nodded slowly. Good policy. He added an extra pound of coffee to their order. Welcome home, Mrs. McCrae. It wasn't forgiveness or acceptance, not yet, but it was a beginning. Weeks passed in a blur of work. The ranch began to thrive under Colt's knowledgeable management and Ella's determined administration. She discovered she had a head for numbers that Samuel had never let her use, while Colt's gift with horses drew buyers from neighboring counties. But it was the nights that transformed her most. In the bedroom she'd once dreaded, she learned what it meant to be cherished. Colt touched her with reverent hands, whispered words of desire and devotion, showed her pleasures she'd never imagined existed. The marriage bed that had been her torture became her sanctuary. I love you, she told him one night, the words coming easy as breathing. "I didn't know I could still feel this." "You saved me," he replied, holding her close. "I came here for revenge and found redemption instead. But redemption rarely comes without trial." Marcus McCrae arrived on a cold December morning. Samuel's brother in the flesh, older, meaner, with the same cruel eyes. "You must be the whore my brother married," he said without preamble. "And this is your criminal paramour." Colt's hand went to his gun, but Ella touched his arm. "State your business, Marcus." "My business is family honor. You've dragged the McCrae name through mud, and I won't stand for it." He pulled out a document. "I filed papers in Denver. Criminal conspiracy. They're calling it, says you two plotted Samuel's death to steal his land." "That's ridiculous," Ella said, though her heart raced. "Samuel died in a riding accident. After years of marriage without incident, then suddenly he's dead and this one appears?" Marcus smiled coldly. "Jury might find that mighty suspicious. Get off our land," Colt said quietly. "Now." "Our land. You admit it then?" Marcus backed toward his horse. "This isn't over. You'll hang. Harrow. And you, dear sister-in-law, will learn what happens to women who forget their place." After he left, Ella sank into a chair. They'd been foolish to think it could be easy. That paper and law would be enough. Samuel's poison reached from beyond the grave. "We could still run," Colt said, kneeling beside her. "Tonight, take what we can carry and go." She looked around the kitchen, at the new curtains she'd sewn, the preserves she'd put up for winter, the rifle Colt had cleaned that morning, at the life they'd begun building from ruins. "No," she said firmly. "We stand and fight, with truth this time, not lies. The truth doesn't always win. Ella, I learned that the hard way. Then we make it win." She gripped his hands. "We have Morrison's testimony about the sheriff's corruption. We have the court documents clearing your name. We have 5 years of me living in fear while the town watched." She felt strength flow through her, clean and fierce. "Let Marcus McCrae try his worst. I'm done being afraid." That night, as snow began to fall, they made love with desperate passion, aware that this might be their last peaceful time for a while. But when morning came, instead of fear, Ella felt only determination. She'd survived Samuel's fists. She'd found love in the ashes of despair. She'd claimed her freedom with both hands. Now she would fight to keep it, with the man beside her who taught her that broken things could be made whole. The world might judge them. Marcus might scheme against them. But here in this house, transformed by hope, they would make their stand. Together. Always together. The Denver courtroom smelled of tobacco and damp wool, packed with spectators drawn by scandal. Ella sat straight-backed beside her lawyer, Mr. Jameson, acutely aware of the whispers rippling through the crowd. Across the aisle, Marcus McCrae conferred with his attorneys, occasionally shooting venomous glances her way. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Theodore Blackwood." Judge Blackwood was a stern man with penetrating eyes that seemed to catalog every person present. As he settled behind the bench, Ella felt Colt's presence behind her in the gallery. He'd been barred from sitting with her, but she drew strength from knowing he was there. "We're here to examine charges of conspiracy in the death of Samuel McCrae." The judge began. "Mr. Prosecutor, make your case." Marcus's lawyer, a oily man named Pemberton, stood with theatrical flair. "Your Honor, we will show that Mrs. McCrae and Mr. Harrow conspired to murder Samuel McCrae for financial gain, that they carried on an inappropriate relationship even before Mr. McCrae's untimely death, and that—" "Objection," Jameson interrupted calmly. "Counsel is making accusations without presenting evidence." "Sustained, Mr. Pemberton. Present your evidence or sit down." What followed was a parade of witnesses, each painting Ella as a scandalous woman. Mrs. Whitlock testified about seeing Colt at the ranch indecently soon after the funeral. Agnes Brewster claimed Ella had never shown proper grief. Even the former sheriff, Hutchinson, had been dragged back to testify about Colt's threatening manner. Through it all, Ella kept her composure, though each word felt like a knife. This was the price of defying convention, to have her life dissected by people who'd never shown her kindness. Then it was Jameson's turn. "I call Dr. Martin Hewitt." The elderly doctor took the stand slowly. He'd treated Ella's injuries over the years, though she'd always claimed accidents. "Dr. Hewitt," Jameson began, "how many times did you treat Mrs. McCrae for injuries during her marriage?" 17 times that I documented, likely more that I didn't see. "And what was the nature of these injuries?" The doctor's face was grave. "Bruised ribs, split lips, a broken wrist. Once, a concussion so severe I feared for her life." "And what did Mrs. McCrae claim caused these injuries?" "Falls, mostly, accidents around the ranch." He looked directly at Ella. "But I've been practicing medicine for 40 years. Sir, I know the difference between accidents and abuse." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Marcus half rose from his seat before his lawyer pulled him down. "Did you ever report your suspicions?" Jameson asked. "To whom?" Sheriff Hutchinson was Samuel's drinking companion. The town council was filled with his friends. The doctor's voice carried decades of regret. To my shame, I stayed silent. Next came Deputy Morrison, nervously recounting finding the payments to Hutchinson in sheriff's records. Then Judge Whelan from the territorial court, explaining how he'd cleared Colt's name after evidence surfaced of Samuel's fraud. Finally, Jameson called Ella herself. She rose on unsteady legs. Colt's whispered courage following her to the stand. After being sworn in, she faced the packed courtroom. Many of these people had watched her suffer for years and done nothing. "Mrs. McCrae," Jameson began gently, "tell us about your marriage to Samuel." "Objection." Pemberton called. "Relevance?" "It goes to motive, Your Honor." Jameson replied, "The prosecution claims my client conspired to kill her husband. The jury needs to understand why she might have wanted him dead, and why she didn't need to kill him to achieve that desire. I'll allow it. Proceed." Ella took a breath, finding Colt's steady gaze in the gallery. Then, in a clear voice that grew stronger with each word, she began to speak her truth. She told them about the wedding night when romance became violence, about learning to read Samuel's moods like weather patterns, about hiding bruises and making excuses, about losing 2 babies to his fists and being blamed for being barren. "I wanted him dead," she said simply, causing a gasp from the crowd. "Every night for 15 years, I prayed for deliverance, but I never acted on it. I was too afraid, too beaten down. When he died in that accident, I felt only relief." "And Mr. Harrow," Jameson prompted, "came seeking justice for what Samuel had done to him. Instead, he helped me rebuild what Samuel had broken. He showed me kindness I'd forgotten existed." Pemberton's cross-examination was brutal, trying to paint her as a manipulative woman who'd seduced a vulnerable ex-convict. But Ella held firm, answering each insinuation with quiet dignity. "Isn't it convenient," Pemberton sneered, "that your husband died just as Mr. Harrow was released from prison?" "Convenient," Ella's voice sharpened. "Sir, if I could have orchestrated Samuel's death, I would have done it 15 years ago, before he broke my ribs the first time, before he killed my babies, before he destroyed everything soft in me." She leaned forward. "I didn't need Colt Harrow to kill my husband. I just needed him to show me I could live again after Samuel was gone." The courtroom erupted. Judge Blackwood gavelled for order. But Ella saw something shift in the jury's faces. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. Jameson's final witness was unexpected. Bill Hutchins from Wyoming, the man who'd actually bought the horses Samuel claimed were stolen. "Kept all my records," Hutchins said, producing yellowed papers. "Samuel McCrae sold me those horses fair and square, then had his foreman arrested for stealing them. When I heard there was trouble again, figured it was time to speak up." In his closing argument, Jameson painted a picture not of conspiracy, but of convergence. 2 people damaged by the same cruel man, finding healing in each other after his death. "The prosecution asks you to believe that Mrs. McCrae who couldn't leave her house without permission, somehow orchestrated a murder plot with a man in prison 5 years away. They ask you to ignore 15 years of documented abuse, to dismiss the evidence of Samuel McCrae's corruption and cruelty. Why? Because a widow found happiness too soon for their comfort, because she chose love over loneliness, truth over silence. When the jury retired, Ella felt drained. In the hallway, Colt pulled her into an alcove, holding her tight. "Whatever happens," he began. "We face it together," she finished. "I meant what I said in there. You taught me to live again." The jury returned in 2 hours. Ella stood, gripping Jameson's table as the foreman read, "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant not guilty." The courtroom exploded again. Marcus McCrae stormed out, shouting about corruption and injustice. But Ella heard none of it. She was in Colt's arms, both of them laughing and crying as friends. Tom Garrett, Deputy Morrison, even old Dr. Hewitt, surrounded them with congratulations. On the courthouse steps, Jameson shook their hands. "Go home," he said. "Live your lives. You've earned that right." As their carriage rolled toward the train station, Ella leaned against Colt's shoulder. "It's over. The legal part, maybe. The town gossip will take longer. Let them gossip. We have work to do." She smiled up at him. Horses to raise, crops to plant, a life to build. Children, maybe. His voice was carefully casual. She placed his hand on her stomach. "Maybe sooner than you think." His joy was radiant, unmarred by the past's shadows. As the train carried them home, Ella thought about the letter she'd found in Samuel's desk, the one that had started everything. "Dear Mr. McCrae," it had read. "I regret to inform you that the horses you claim were stolen have been located with their rightful buyer. Your former employee, Colt Harrow, appears to have been wrongfully convicted. Perhaps it's time to clear your conscience." She'd burned it along with Samuel's clothes. The past was dead. Only the future mattered now. At the ranch, neighbors had gathered. Not many, but enough. Women who'd silently endured their own trials. Men who'd suspected the truth but stayed quiet, one by one. They welcomed her home, not as Samuel McCrae's widow, but as Ella herself, finally, fully. That night, in the bed that had been her prison and was now her sanctuary, she told Colt about the baby, his reverent hands on her still flat stomach, his whispered promises to this new life, his tears of joy. All of it washed away the last residue of the trial's ugliness. They'd won more than a legal victory. They'd claimed the right to love without shame, to build without fear, to stand in the light without apology. And in a world that had tried to break them both, that was the greatest triumph of all. Spring arrived with a vengeance that year, melting snow into rushing streams and coaxing wildflowers from the warming earth. Ella stood on the porch, one hand resting on her swelling belly, watching Colt work with a young stallion in the corral. His movements were patient, gentle, so different from Samuel's brutal methods. "Easy there," she heard him murmur to the skittish animal. "No one's going to hurt you here." The words could have been meant for any of them, the horse, herself, the child growing within her. This ranch had become a sanctuary for broken things learning to trust again. "Mrs. Harrow?" She turned, still adjusting to the name. They'd married quietly 2 months after the trial, with Judge Whelan officiating and only a handful of witnesses. Some in town still called her the McCrae widow, but she didn't mind. Let them cling to the past if they wished. Tom Garrett stood hat in hand, his weathered face creased with concern. "That north fence is down again. Looks like somebody cut it deliberate-like." Ella sighed. Marcus McCrae had left the territory after the trial, but his poison lingered in small acts of sabotage. Nothing they couldn't handle, but wearing nonetheless. "We'll repair it," she said firmly, "and keep repairing it until they get tired of destroying." Tom nodded, admiration clear in his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. My boys and I will get right on it." As he left, Colt joined her on the porch. sweat darkening his shirt despite the cool air. Trouble? Nothing we haven't faced before. She leaned into his solid warmth. How's the new horse? Coming along, scared but not mean. There's a difference. His hand came to rest beside hers on her belly. How are you both? Restless. This little one has your stubborn streak already. He chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. Heaven help us then. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the ranch come alive with spring activity. The garden she'd planted showed green shoots. Foals gambled in the pasture beside their mothers. Life flourished where death had once held sway. I've been thinking, Colt said eventually, about California. Her heart stuttered. You want to leave? No. He turned her to face him. I want to bring Sarah here, my sister, if she'll come. Of course. We have room. Her husband won't like it. I'm still a convicted criminal in most folks' eyes. Cleared or not. Then she'll have to choose. Ella touched his face. Family should mean more than reputation. That afternoon, while Colt wrote to his sister, Ella tackled the ledgers. The ranch was turning profitable under their management. Nothing grand, but enough to live on, to build with. She was deep in calculations when hoofbeats announced a visitor. Through the window, she saw an elegant carriage, out of place on their rough road. The woman who descended was equally incongruous. Silk dress, elaborate hat, everything Ella had never been. She opened the door warily. Can I help you? The woman's face was familiar but unplaceable. Ella. Oh, you won't remember me. Mary Harrow was Mary Patterson. I heard, that is, Colt wrote to Sarah, and she told me. Colt's lost love. The woman who'd married another rather than wait. Ella's protective instincts flared, but she kept her voice level. He's in the barn. I'll fetch him. No, wait. Mary's gloved hand caught her sleeve. I came to see you. Me? To apologize and to explain, if you'll let me. Against her better judgment, Ella invited her in. They sat awkwardly at the kitchen table, the same table where Colt had first told his story. I loved him, Mary said without preamble. But I was 19 and terrified. My family depended on me marrying well. When Colt was arrested, they pressured me to cut ties, said a convicted thief would ruin us all. So you chose security over love. Yes. Mary's elegant composure cracked, and I've regretted it every day since. My husband is a good man, but he's not Colt. He doesn't have that fire. Ella thought of Colt's gentle hands, his fierce protection, the way he whispered her name in the darkness. No, she agreed quietly. He's singular. I heard about the trial, about what you endured with Samuel McCrae, about how Colt helped you heal. Mary leaned forward. I'm glad he found someone strong enough to fight beside him instead of running away. We fight for each other. Ella's hand moved unconsciously to her belly. And for our future. Mary's eyes followed the gesture, understanding dawning. A child. He must be so happy. We both are. They sat in silence, two women bound by one man's heart, one who'd held it, one who'd broken it, and one who'd helped it mend. Finally, Mary rose. I should go, but would you give him this? She pulled out a small wrapped package. It's his mother's Bible. I've kept it all these years, but it belongs with him. After she left, Ella sat holding the package, processing the strange encounter. When Colt came in for dinner, she told him about the visit, watching emotions play across his face. Surprise, old pain, and finally, peace. She brought this. Ella handed him the Bible. He unwrapped it slowly, running his fingers over the worn leather cover. Inside, pressed between pages, were dried flowers and a lock of hair. My mother's, he said softly. She died when I was 12. That night, he read aloud from the Bible, not sermons or admonishments, but the poetry of Psalms, the wisdom of Proverbs. Ella dozed against his shoulder, feeling the baby move in response to his voice. Days flowed into weeks, spring into summer. Ella's belly rounded further, making ranch work challenging. But she persisted, determined to contribute until the last possible moment. The town's attitude shifted gradually, not to full acceptance, but to a grudging respect. She'd stood trial and triumphed. She worked alongside her husband. She'd taken something broken and made it whole. The baby came on a thunderous August night, with Dr. Hewitt attending and Colt pacing like a caged cougar. The labor was long, but easier than her lost babies, as if this child was determined to live, to thrive. "It's a girl." "Doctor," Hewitt announced, and Ella heard the catch in Colt's breathing. They named her Hope, not for sentiment, but for truth. She was their hope made flesh, proof that love could bloom in scorched earth, that broken people could create something whole and perfect. "She's beautiful," Colt whispered, cradling his daughter with infinite care. "Like her mother, stubborn like her father," Ella countered, exhausted but euphoric. "Look how she grips your finger." As dawn broke, they lay together in the bed that had witnessed so much transformation, from prison to sanctuary, from loneliness to love. Baby Hope slept between them, tiny fists waving at dreams only she could see. "No regrets?" Colt asked, echoing his question from that night in the mountains. "Only gratitude." She traced their daughter's perfect features. "For the journey that brought us here." A knock interrupted them. Tom Garrett with news that the mare had foaled successfully, adding another life to their growing legacy. The ranch stirred to life around them. No longer Samuel McCrae's monument to cruelty, but the harrow spread, where second chances flourished. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across the valley, they sat on the porch, Colt whittling a toy for Hope, Ella nursing their daughter, both watching the land they'd claimed through courage rather than conquest. "I want to plant trees," Ella said suddenly. "Along the drive, something that will grow tall, give shade to our grandchildren." "Oaks," Colt suggested. "They endure. Like us," she thought but didn't say. Like this love that had weathered storms and emerged stronger. Like the child in her arms who would know only kindness from her parents' hands. The stars emerged slowly, diamonds on velvet, the same stars that had witnessed their flight and return. But now they seemed like promises rather than distant observers, each one a small light defying darkness. Proof that even the vastest night couldn't swallow every flame. "Thank you," she told him as Hope finished nursing and settled into sleep. "For what?" "For knocking on my door that night, for showing me I could be more than a victim, for staying when leaving would have been easier." He set aside his whittling, drawing them both into his arms. "You saved me too. Ella gave me something to build instead of tear down. Showed me that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about creating something better from the ruins." They sat in peaceful silence as night deepened around them. Inside the house, a warm fire waited. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, fences to mend, horses to train, a child to raise with love instead of fear. But tonight, there was this. A family forged from fragments. A home built on honest ground. A future stretching bright despite the darkness they'd survived. In the distance, coyotes called to each other across the canyon, wild and free. The sound no longer seemed lonely, but communal. Creatures finding their pack, their place, their purpose under the vast western sky, just as they had found theirs, against all odds and expectations, in each other's arms. The night held them gently, and they held each other the same way, as if they were precious, which they were, as if love could heal any wound, which it had, as if tomorrow was a gift rather than a threat, which it finally was, and in her parents' arms. Hope slept on, dreaming of a world where broken things were made beautiful and every ending was really just another beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I hope Ella and Colt's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine in the telling. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles. If you enjoyed this story of redemption and second chances, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more tales of love, courage, and frontier justice. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of their story resonated with you most? Until next time, partners, Keep riding toward your own horizons.